continue on with our conversation about S60, the Fire and Security Special Fund. And this is likely the most recent copy with the notes that was sent from the chair from our conversation yesterday. But if not, we will just have a walkthrough.
Well, I haven't incorporated any of the notes because they were presented to me as questions
Okay, great.
and not as edits. The first question was, is there evidence to support each finding? And I did work with the sponsor in the Senate to support these findings.
Okay.
But some of them are less findings and more whereas clauses. For example, the state should establish a permanent funding support program. That's more of an action instead of a finding. Then the next question was, should a fire event have to be widespread? That's really up to you. If you want to allow relief for discrete events such as barn fires, that's up to you. But these are supposed to be a weather condition. And as to verifying it, the agency has to or has authority to go out under 4633 to verify the event as related to weather. And that also relates to the next question. What about extreme heat or drought? What is the duration for that? Well, there's no specific requirement for that right now. But again, the agency has the ability to go out and verify the weather condition and its eligibility.
What would be extreme? What would be extreme heat? I mean, how would, as long as there's moisture and sun,
If it's over 100 degrees, your lettuce might die or something.
even under, no, okay.
Well, there's going to be heat warnings. I think in Vermont, it's whenever it gets over 90, over 40.
To kill certain
Yeah.
things.
So there are, I spent a lot of time on the Weather Service and the USGS service websites last night for a whole other reason. But they do maintain all of those all those standards at both the national and at regional level, and sometimes even at sub-regional level. Next question was, do you intend to limit to parcels within the state? And does subject to RAPs cover all those you want to be eligible? It is only available to those that are subject to the RAPs, and only farms and farm parcels in Vermont are subject to the RAPs. They don't apply outside of Vermont. Whether you want it to cover more than that, I don't know. That's up to you. I don't know who you would apply it to.
I think we had one question before that. I'm sorry, Richard.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about lightning. Is that considered weather?
Yes,
That could fall under H, right?
we could call under any other severe, or could, if it caused fire, it could, well, that won't be widespread. So I do think lightning could qualify.
So two questions. One, and Heather probably verified it. And I just want to make sure a 10-acre vegetable farm would be covered in this event. So they seem to suffer more extreme damages than.
I think you gotta be bigger than 10.
Well, it's 4 acres yesterday, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
Well, the Black Earth Mirth or whatever,
You met
they're
there.
12 acres, but they only farm 8 at any one time.
No, it could be, 4 or more. Preparing, tilling, fertilizing, planting, protecting, irrigating, and harvesting crops for sale on a farm that is no less than 4 contiguous acres in size. If you're 4 or more, then you would qualify.
So my 12 blueberry bushes don't count.
Unless you are producing an annual gross income from the sale of ag products of $2,000 or more in an average year.
Blueberry bushes are not the other bush.
What happens with like, you could have 10 high tunnels on an acre and make $100,000 potentially.
10 what?
High tunnels.
You don't even qualify.
Sure. You would still, there's 4 or 5, arguably 6 ways to qualify. And one of them, you're producing an annual gross income from the sale of ag products of $2,000 or more in an average year.
So if you just do that, you.
Right. But if you're on a vegetable farm and you're 4 acres or more and say your entire crop is wiped out, which has happened, you're still farming, you're still subject to the RAPs.
The other part of my question was lightning. It's not a widespread event. It's, cow die every year, lightning strikes out in the field. Hopefully everyone has insurance to pony up on that. See how you could come to the state for a claim.
Yeah, no, I don't either, but just on the, oh, you're not acting, he's not here.
Right, okay. Representative O'Brien.
Like, we had a bunch of conversations yesterday about sort of border farms, that farm in both states. So if you were a Vermont-based farm, but were leasing, say, land in New Hampshire and grew, following the RAP still, if you lost, if the land in New Hampshire was flooded, would that be eligible?
Oh. Okay. It's not subject to the RAPs if it's in New Hampshire.
Okay, you're a New Hampshire-based farm. And you're farming, you have acreage in Vermont.
Yes, you don't have to live here in order to own farmland here.
So it's really physical, right?
Chair.
I guess I'm still not clear on whether a produce farm that's smaller than 4 acres is subject to the RAPs and would qualify.
It is.
More than
If they
$2,000.
make $2,000
That's any
from
farm.
the sale of agricultural products, then they are farming and they're subject to the RAPs.
And they are also subject to the RAPs.
Yep. It's also a way to define yourself as current use land, which is one of the reasons why it's included as under the RAPs, because you wouldn't want to say they're not subject to the RAPs, but say they could enroll that land in current use. Next question. Well, we just did the parcels in Vermont. Do we want to add a dedicated funding source such as a sugary drink tax? If you want to, you could. It'll send it to another committee. They'll want to potentially use that revenue source for other purposes, as they always do. But yeah, you could dedicate a funding source, a revenue source, if you wanted. Does anything else on that one?
Come back to that one.
I have had another conversation with my friend in Ways and Means, and I can give another update. She was less encouraging after thinking about it more.
Okay. Since you want the funding to be dispersed expeditiously, do you want to award grants, or does that imply reimbursements for a new round of farmer purchases?
So, and if I may jump in
Oh,
here,
please,
just to clarify that, we had heard from the agency that there was a distinction between grants and beneficial
Payment, yeah.
something they call beneficial payments. The grants would necessitate the applicant to show that they had purchased something, another round of seeds or new equipment, and then submit a bill for reimbursement.
There's tons of conditions connected to grants. For example, you don't get all of your money all at once. You get, I think it's 80 or 90% of your money. And then you have to fill out a report at the end of the grant term, and then you get the rest of your money. And it's all for due diligence and accounting for state finance.
So that's the grants are what the bill currently has, language wise. And the agency was floating the idea of changing that to something else that would mean you did get all your money all at once and you got it faster. I don't know that they address the need to report.
That's all. If you call anything a grant, there's administrative bulletin 3.5 for contracts and grants, which requires, it's 45 pages long. So there's a lot of things in there.
So if we changed it from grant to beneficial payments, then
You're not subject to 3.5, but you're going to probably have to have some kind of auditing aspect of the program. Just like at the end of each year, the secretary shall audit the program, something like that.
I think that'd be prudent anyway.
about it.
So you want that in?
Yeah, maybe flag that and we can look at that in the next version, and if there are objections to it, back to them.
By look at it, you mean change it from a grant to beneficial payment and have an audit requirement?
Yeah.
Do you know if we eventually heard that BGAP was a grant, and so do you know if there was that last spent 10-20% withheld until there was that sort of accounting period or audit period?
I can't say for certain, but if they filed 3.5, then it should have been. Some people just don't do the report, and don't get the money. Should I go on? Is the 150,000 still the right max award? Should the max award be a percentage of the eventual appropriation? I didn't understand that second question.
So first we asked, the 150 was in the original bill. There was originally 200 million envisioned for the fund. Thank you, 22, yeah. So if we don't in fact expect it to be 20 million, ultimately is the 150 a larger amount than we want? That was the first half of the question. And then somebody suggested, since it might be hard to know what that amount is, would it make any sense to put in, it will be every year, the maximum amount will be X% of whatever the appropriation is. And one thought I had on that is there are other funding sources are envisioned, private philanthropy or fundraising, federal money. So that may be a consideration in thinking about this.
So the special fund is a carry forward fund. So the money that isn't spent in 1 year goes into the next year. So if you're going to base it on a percentage of the appropriation, you wouldn't be accounting for that carryover in the subsequent year. I could probably try to talk to JFO about how to do that, but I would just like to talk to JFO about how to do that.
Well, anyway, it was a question and we can just leave it as a question still to be answered. And the dollar amount also a question still to be answered.
David, I would weigh in, it was originally 20. It could be as low as 500,000, could be 2 million this year. 2 million, feel fortunate. 150 is too much, I think.
For the maximum.
For the maximum, and if it builds up in a few years. The statute could be amended or.
I mean, honestly, you're probably gonna be. You may be managing the appropriation from the fund every year, amount and maximum every year in the big bill. I mean, that's a possibility as well.
What's two things. I look at this bill as more of a vehicle that may not get funded, but be there. And then if there's a disaster, the governor or USDA or FEMA sends money that could be, this could be a vehicle for that money to go into.
No, but there's nothing that would prevent that.
That's right. And that's good. I don't want to prevent that, but that's part of the way I look at this bill going to be is I don't know if we'll get funding in it. We may, but the way appropriations has been pretty tight. We may not this year. There was another question I had in there.
I will say in response to further response, if you're out of session, the amount of money that can be moved by the e-board is limited. I mean, so if there's a really significant catastrophe, the amount of money that can be moved into this fund is probably not going to be enough to deal with that. But the agency could go find other sources, federal or otherwise, to bridge them to the new year, or maybe you call a special session on them.
Okay, and I remember my other part of my question. If we had $5 million in there and we go through the year and it doesn't get drawn down, and the next year is a year like this year, what's to stop somebody from raiding that fund to use it to buy down education or to?
Really nothing. You do say in the special fund that the balance carries forward. But if there's significant balance in any special fund, the appropriations committees can go get it.
I know they tried to get the duck stamp fund before.
Yeah, if whenever there's a special fund that has a significant reserve, they've tried to get it. And there's not much you can do about it. Even when you don't want to raid reserves, for example, the Petroleum Cleanup Fund, that's a fund that's basically an insurance fund for people that have underground storage tanks. And that insurance is required by the federal government. And so you don't want to raid that fund because it puts those underground storage tanks under threat of federal violation. And there's even language in the Petroleum Cleanup Fund statute said that basically says you're never going to be able to take this money at all, but you have. So you've only done it once or twice, and the petroleum dealers get a little rebellious when you do that.
So as far as the 150 goes, Jed suggested that he would be in favor of a lower number. Does anybody feel strongly that we should keep the 150? Let me ask the question that way. Does anybody feel like that is the best number?
Can I just, how does that work when you've got, sometimes fully funded or much less funded, and then you've got a cap, that's in statute, that's very specific to are there rules where you can adjust those like you're suggesting so that it might be more percentage of whatever's appropriated that year, then the award would follow that percentage?
The other thing you do is you say the max is up to a certain amount, but the grantee has to balance the applications and make awards equitably across all applications. But that is usually not in a first come, first serve rolling application process like this is.
Well, yeah, that's another question we have later on.
Yes, okay, well, all right, I think we can move on, but there seems to be a sentiment that a lower number would be appropriate, and then possibly some way to tie it to the funding, but we can explore that or ask Mike to look into that.
Okay, do you intend to cover up to 50% of any losses that aren't covered through insurance or other reimbursement? Well, the grant is only available on page 4, line 8 for uninsured or otherwise uncovered losses. So,
Yeah.
yes, that's what you intend, or that's what the language is
Okay, yes.
stating.
So the two things came out of I think that language when you were looking at it. One was there was a question about whether the language was clear enough. But I think the other question was whether, and this maybe comes in a little bit later, but how would, there's nothing in the application that says you need to supply insurance information. There's that. But even if there were, if this is a program that's turning out money quickly to help people, insurance programs don't turn out money quickly to help people. So you wouldn't know whether you were going to get an insurance payment for perhaps for a long time. I think that was part of the question too.
The federal crop insurance program, if you have a field that's decimated, you're gonna get a payment. It's gonna be in the winter. But you're gonna, like by December, January, you're gonna have a payment. They have to wait till the end of the growing season. Except if it's completely annihilated, they can come out and walk it then. But they don't necessarily know the rate because they don't know what they said is the bushel price, therefore the tonnage price on corn. But the NAP insurance they have is such a poor payer. The non-insured crop stuff, that there should be an exclusion to that because it's just terrible, we heard
1%.
or less than 1%, and that, that basically covers them buying soap to wash their hands from trying to clean their stuff, it just it's terrible, and that should be excluded from any kind of insurance payment, that NAP program, because it just doesn't pay. Or do they get the grant and they can't apply for the NAP? Or the beneficial payment, they just don't apply for the NAP, which I'm sure most of them would gladly trade one for the other.
There's nothing in this that precludes the applicant from seeking reimbursement of anything that's not reimbursed by this program. So
Okay.
they can go and
They apply for the NAP.
whatever
Yeah.
program they want. I can't say the same for the federal programs
Yeah.
or other assistance programs. The application doesn't specifically in the bill say that you have to identify whether you're insured or not, but that's an including clause. That's just a list of things including. I would expect that the application will require the applicant to note whether or not they have insurance and how much of it covered the losses. Because the payment is only going to be for that uninsured, unreimbursed loss.
So we wouldn't want people to be fully insured, get full cover, a payment fully covering their loss and get something from this fund. We wouldn't want that to happen.
No, that's double counting, double
Prevents that from happening.
dipping, and to try to avoid that at all opportunity.
So just a example that, you know, say Greg has $100,000 orchard loss. And 50% is insured, or he's gonna get 50% eventually. It's all insured, but he's signed up for the 50% coverage. Could he then apply for a $50,000 loss to this and at most get 25,000? Is that the way it would work? Because you could only get half?
It would only be half of the 50, only 50% of what is uninsured or uncovered.
But the whole thing, say, was insured, but he only had a 50%.
Well, I think maybe that's where it should be reimbursed under insurance. Or insurance payment, 50% of those losses that did not receive reimbursement under insurance payment. Maybe that's where I think you're running into trouble.
Let's make that change.
Okay. Should I move on?
Yeah, and I think the next one, I think maybe you've just covered, but
Didn't really, the calculation of what? In the calculation of your award amount?
yes, so
Calculation of losses.
there was a question yesterday when we were having this conversation about whether if there was, in a world where there was a fund that would reimburse you for 50%, would that discourage people from taking out insurance because it's going to limit how much their award could be in this grant program?
I think that's going to be a business decision. Because if you have 400 acres of corn versus 10 acres of vegetables, the insurance for corn is going to be worth it, because it's going to be more than $150,000 if you lost that 400 acres. So you want to be able to cover as much as you can with crop insurance or other insurance. Whereas the 10 acres of vegetables, you might not even be able to get crop insurance for that. And so you would be relying on this program to backstop you due to a weather loss. I don't know and that's one of the bases for NOFA bringing this program forward, is that they have members who it's not viable or even possible for them to get crop insurance. And then where do they go? So
Is crop insurance mostly commodity based then?
that's
So if you had a very diversified veggie plot, you're out of.
it's based on your crop and your crop value.
Yeah, think I-States.
I will say this again, and maybe somebody listening can help, but there were 2 or maybe 3, I think, witnesses in Senate Ag on this bill who were able to speak authoritatively, even more authoritatively than Mike, on the way insurance works, because they're in that business. And I think we've reached out unsuccessfully in trying to get testimony.
Were they like private firms or were they federal FSA type? Okay.
Yeah. So I feel that it would be really useful for the committee to hear from those people before we ended up taking any action on the bill. So we'll keep trying.
Okay, the next question is, how would the fact that 50% or more of farms have a net income loss affect the calculation of an award? And I assume that relates to page 4, lines 11 through 13. And that's going to be a modifier in the calculation of the payment. So this is really intended so that a farm that has a loss, that's qualifying, but is also a net profit maker, may have a reduced payment. But if you have a net loss, your modifier in relation to the median net income of all farms is going to. Oh, I see what you're saying. So what if everybody has a net loss? Well,
Well, I think what we were possibly imagining was a scenario where the average, net income of a farm is the $100,000, just as a round number. And if you're a farm that makes on average, if you produce a Schedule F that shows your profit is $50,000, then okay, you know where to compare them. But what if your Schedule F shows a loss? Now, how are they going to calculate that? What your award should be?
I mean, it will just increase the modifier.
Okay.
Um,
And what we've written here gives the secretary the authority to imagine that scenario.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Now, NOFA didn't like it. NOFA didn't like the modifier, but Senator Hardy was concerned about those farms with net annual income taking a payment when those farms without may have been last in line and won't get a payment. So wanted to modify the payment for those with net income. Moving on.
Yes.
The next is, do we need to include wages, debt payments, et cetera, or can we limit the list to replacement of lost income, cost of replanting, replacing livestock, repair, replace? That's up to you. That's a purely policy decision on what's going to be eligible.
So if we can just go to that list.
Page 5.
Yeah. Go ahead, John, you had a
Just
question.
quickly, so if I'm a farm that shows a profit, even though I had losses from flooding, am I still eligible?
We can still apply.
Okay,
But your award is going to be subject to a modifier. So they determine what your losses are, 50% unreimbursed. Then they multiply that by the modifier and it's likely going to go down, but you're still likely to get an award.
but it's all in the context of what you made as a farm for that year, not in that I totally lost my pumpkin crop.
Right. I mean, technically, if you go beyond any net profit, you're zeroed out. Is anything below zero is zero, and so your modifier is now zero. So
Somebody else can jump in here if you want, but I think the question was, seemed like these things weren't all sort of the same type. And that we could understand if you had a reimbursable loss could be, put the cost of replanting, for example. Or lost income from destroyed crops if it was too late to replant. But equipment is further down the list. And repair, but wages seem a little bit different. How would you experience lost wages as a result of a flood? Or how would you experience lost debt payment?
you can't afford to pay either. And so I agree that they look superficially as they're not related, but they are related when you consider that these are the costs to run the farm. And if they don't have the income from the lost crops or livestock, these are the things that will potentially drive them out of business if they can't use.
So if you had a weather event, and it was too late to do anything, you couldn't replant, buying equipment, maybe it was too late to do that, but you're still trying to pay wages that you could cover your.
Say you're a vegetable farm that pays their employees based on what they sell at the 3 farmers markets you go to each year, and that's how you cover your employee. But then you have no crops to sell because of a flood or other event, and you can't pay them, and maybe they've already worked an event or two, and you cannot pay. So this would be available to pay for those wages.
Yeah, or maybe you've been paying them right along up from last year's profits. And you lose your crop, and then you got, but to me, when I read B, replacement of lost income from destroyed crops or impacted livestock, to me, the income covers most everything. If you lost your income, you can't make your wages, you can't make your debt payment. But if in the legalese world, you need to list these things, then so be it. I'm not a barrister.
This is an including clause, so it's not the full universe. The agency will be able to approve additional losses, which is the final subsection. Other losses is determined by the secretary after consultation with the review board. But these, I think, are the common costs that will need reimbursement. The one that I think where a farm might run into some issues is roads necessary to access a farm. If you're talking about that road being partly a municipal road or even class 4, what can be done to repair that road is maybe limited in the farmer's control. But I do think it's interesting to have that in there because some farms, as an ex-member of this committee once found out, if your road, your municipal road isn't maintained well enough, they're not going to pick up your product. They're not going to pick up your milk. They're not going to pick up livestock.
Yeah. Think DeGrasse in Richmond, that 23 and 24 flood totally. I mean, they were an island and they couldn't get to the farm or out of the farm until that road was fixed, and it wasn't covered under anything.
So, I think I understand the situation you're describing there, and it could result in, even if there were no damage at all on the farm, if the town road that accessed the farm was washed out, you would lose income, and we'd want to cover.
Right.
We want to try or consider covering, that situation. Representative Bosden, did you have a hand up earlier?
I did not.
Okay, Representative Lipsky.
You know, the notion of the profitable farm covering losses, and then under this debt payment, I don't know, I've never been a farmer, but as a logger, you've got very expensive equipment. And you also, the reason why you almost never make profit is you take advantage of depreciation. And we had testimony about manure injection equipment or no-till planters that were up to $1 million in this. you know, what most equipment you might be on a 5-year depreciation schedule. So where it's a big factor in why you're never profitable, because the equipment is so expensive. And you gotta make the payments, or if you don't make the payments, the depreciation's irrelevant, because you lose. So I'm just saying, I don't quite understand about the debt payment part and
So,
depreciation. and how
again,
that impacts.
I think it's about those costs that a farmer needs to pay in order to remain viable. You know, a long time ago, a member of this committee said farmers are the best managers of debt and the worst managers of debt at the same time. And I do think that is part of the business, part of the monthly, accounts that you have to pay in order to remain viable.
So,
But it's up to you, though. Remember, this is also up to you. If you don't want to include that in there, you don't need to include that in there. If the secretary, after consultation with the board, determines that, yes, it should be an eligible payment, then the secretary can do that.
I think that we can keep going here, move on, but I will just summarize what I think the question is and was yesterday by saying that it seemed like we could almost get rid of the list except for B. Replacement of lost income. And that everything else would then follow, then that lost income would be used to pay wages if you had employees who needed to be paid, or to make your debt payments, et cetera. But why don't we leave it for now? We can think about that more if we want to.
I think the next question was in eligible losses, should the conjunction at the end be an or an and? Because this is an including clause, I think you can use either, but I prefer or.
Okay.
What page is that?
It's going from page 4 to page 5, and that the specific word is page 5, line 7.
So someone had asked yesterday whether we wanted to change that to and, but sounds like, Mike, you're saying we don't need to. It's still.
Yeah, it still includes
Yeah.
this or that or this. I think you can use either conjunctive or disjunctive. There's opportunity, but I don't
And
think.
it doesn't preclude any of them, like you could have every single one, right?
Yeah. Next, do all farms, including LLPs and corporations, file a Schedule F? Chair had asked me to look into this. I did a little bit, but I haven't fully completed that. I think my initial response is no, not everyone files a Schedule F. But I have to confirm that.
So if that's the case, then we just would add some language here to.
Right, or an equivalent record or evidence of income,
Farm receipts.
something.
Okay.
Should we require insurance information if that is being factored into the award? So if insurance being factored in, but it's not as part of the award, it's a part of what you don't receive.
Yeah.
Do you want, I do think, as I said earlier, the application is going to ask for them to note whether or not their farm is covered by insurance or any of their losses are covered by insurance. So I think it's probably already going to be addressed.
Okay.
To avoid regularly depleting the fund early in the fiscal year, could we use semi-annual or quarterly application cycles? I think that's up to you.
So we were just thinking about a situation where could be heavy rains in June, the end of June, and you're out of luck because the money had all been spent during that fiscal year, and then there might be rains the next week and you're into July, and then there would be money available. And how would we, no matter how you change the timing, there's always going to be that day where
Right.
somebody,
So if you wanted to do that, you would say the whatever interval you want, 4 months, 3 months. The secretary shall establish applications for award during the first quarter. Any unused money allocated for the first quarter rolls over to the second quarter. And so on and so forth.
so we were having a robust conversation yesterday. Somebody brought that idea up. It seemed like an idea worth at least running by you to see whether it could be done. In your
And I'll talk to JFO about it too.
Richard.
Yeah, so, thank you. You know, you have a frost in May, you blister a bunch of apples. Of course, they don't know how bad they got blistered until August. Then you have a rain event in June. And then maybe you have a hail event in August, or there's all these different factors, and almost this money should be run seasonal, growing season wise.
Well, I mean, I think that's why I said, do you want to do it 4 months or 3 months? You know, I had 2 months. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's up to you.
Yeah, I would say let's flag that as something that you can ask, make sure that it can be done, and then maybe the agency and the farm community can give us more insight. Richard, we can talk about it too. Yeah.
I think the biggest problem was that the fiscal year is cutting the crop year right in half.
Right, but if true, but if yeah, I mean, think about those crops that cross over that July 1st threshold, right? It may not be based on your, yeah, I don't know. Gonna have to think about that.
Well, if we get to make up the rules, we'll just make it up.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, should you use an existing board such as WeLab rather than setting up a new board? You can use WeLab just like you did with the new farmer program, the money that was there for that. I think with regard to the timing of this program, WeLab might not be the best. They are big. And remember, you got to get everyone together, and there's got to be a majority, but well, not everyone, a quorum together, and there's got to be a majority vote. That sounds harder than, or sounds easier than it actually is. So I don't know if WeLab can rally every 15 days to review and recommend. That would be my concern.
And the second half of the question, I guess, was, is there another existing board? And
I would talk with the agency about them. The agency setting up maybe with like the conservation districts or out in every county anyway. And have expertise in a lot of this stuff. Maybe.
Well, the agency runs grant programs on their own without boards. Water quality, they did it during COVID. I mean, they don't need a board to run a payment or a grant program. The benefit of a board is it's a counterbalance to an administration that may not value this program. And so maybe an administration doesn't make awards, or doesn't even run the program. But if you have a board, you're basically having that counterbalance. I think you probably don't have that concern with this agency, especially if they're going to testify that they're in. I haven't really seen anybody at the agency that's been nefarious since my first couple of years. There were some nefarious people the first couple of years.
A while ago, for the record, right? Yeah, yeah.
Didn't take place on the House floor.
Yeah, just, I was talking to Maddie from NOFA at the end of the session yesterday, and she said that they had 4 farmers that were more or less on call to be available when they had the emergency funding money that they had pulled together, and then they had to decide how they were gonna distribute it. And she said they actually had a lot of people that were willing to look at those spots and wanted to serve, like it felt like something really relevant and important to them. And she actually really just was expressing hope that we would keep some farmers on the board, because she thinks they have a useful perspective and they will make time for it, if we have the funds for them to help their peers when they're not in struggle space. So anyway, just sharing that.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know how to answer further. If you want to use a board, you can. I wouldn't recommend the WeLab because it is so big. I think having farmers on it is up to you. There's a question here. Do you conflict any off and give the chair the ability to appoint alternates? You can do that. That's done elsewhere.
Let's add that in, like, let's have you add that in to the next version. I think that, yeah, people felt that made sense. Assuming we end up keeping the board.
And there could be a
Admin.
conflict of interest with farmers anyway who want to apply for it and are on the
Yeah.
board, right?
The next is, what does 1 VSA 5 authorize for advisory bodies? It basically is just a part of the open meeting law. It says, for state and local advisory bodies, a quorum or more of the members of an advisory body may attend any meeting by electronic or other means without being physically present at or staffing a designated meeting location. Just means that they can meet remotely.
Okay.
And an advisory body is one that doesn't have supervision, control, or jurisdiction over legislative, quasi-judicial, tax, or budgetary matters. Arguably, a grant program might be a budgetary matter, but the secretary is the one that runs the program. Secretary is the one that makes the award, so the secretary is the one. They're just advisory to the secretary. So, and then what is authorized in 32 VSA 1010? Well, that's just compensation. It's per diem and expenses. If you're on a board and you're not otherwise compensated for your participation.
I think, yeah, Rep. Liskey yesterday asked about compensation, and so we saw this in here, but we weren't sure how much this compensation was currently under this statute.
I don't know what the number is now. It changes based on Congressional Budget Office numbers. I'll have to figure that out for you. So.
Okay. But there is a number in there for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta run to another committee, but when would you like to see in a next draft?
Well, you can check with Sidonia and have her be in touch about a time when you're available and it works for you. I don't think it needs to be, overnight. We are taking testimony on Friday, more testimony. And I'm scheduled to speak with the agency in a few minutes. And I know that NOFA wants to testify again too. But having another draft to work from at some point would be useful. So
Okay. Are you planning to be on the floor a lot tomorrow afternoon?
the expectation, yeah.
And that'll give me time to draft
Okay.
it. On another note, right to farm, it's moving along, but there was discussion about where it's going and how it's going and how they take a vote and when they take a vote and whether it should come to you before they make any amendment or, so I don't know the resolution of that. I just wanted to let you know that that's still moving, but I don't know which way it's moving.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and thank you, Representative Supernaut, for